hello. Picture this. A sunny, bright day in South England. Pretty hard, yeah. But I was having tea with my mum, and she turned to me and she said, "Noah, you haven't listened to a word I've said." I thought, strange way to start a conversation. My whole life, I haven't been a great listener. I'd do what I was told, but I'd have a constant hyperactive energy. I'd be told to sit at my desk for hours on end, and all I could think about was movement. How fast could I run around the school, or sail around the school for that matter? How could I cause the next ruckus? Where should I throw my pencil? This would obviously get me into trouble more often than not. But nothing would give me the incentive to change. Parallel to this, my parents would always have friends over for dinner. I wouldn't normally be bothered. I'd sit in my room, play video games, or watch TV, normal stuff. But one day, I decided to sit in. My dad had one of his oldest friends over, Spike, a sports journalist for the Guardian newspaper. He started to tell me about the World Cup and how much he loved to be on the side of some of the world's biggest football matches. He told me how this year he was going to South Africa for free. My 12-year-old self was like, what? I want to go to South Africa for free. There was obviously more to the story, but I was so mesmerized by him, and I never missed another dinner party after that. I started to think, if my dad's old 50-year-old friend can be interesting, can't anyone? Not so old, not so old. I thought about my listening at school, how much I might have been missing out not listening. How many stories my 60-year-old English teacher, Miss Todd, could have had for me that I would never know if she told me or not. I reflected, and I think my listening was dependent on authenticity. How someone being really true to themselves triggered me to listen, but when someone was doing or saying what was expected of them, it made me lose respect and disconnect from what they were saying. My listening reasoning wasn't conscious, but I knew I preferred it when I was listening to when I wasn't, and that's when my listening journey truly began. We often think our intelligence is based on what we say or how intelligent we sound to others. But 85% of everything we learn is from listening. Think about that. If intelligence is knowledge, it would be hard to be the most talkative in the room and be the most intelligent. But everything I researched about communication spoke about how we can change the way we speak to make people listen. I want to flip that on its head and say if we can teach people to truly listen, we can all then speak and communicate that much more authentically. The obvious irony in that is that I have to be here today with my pristine or not so pristine presentation, speaking at you guys for 13 to 20 minutes. But I'm not here to be the font of all knowledge or to sound like an expert, but merely to express an interest that I really think, can change the world. We all know that one person that wants to be the funniest or loudest or smartest in the room. Maybe it's you. Or most of the time, that's me. I wanted to make a change. So 10 months, I dove into a pool of research, finding out all there was to listening and how important it can be. I ended up interviewing 3 people. I interviewed a doctor, a spiritualist, and a hypnotherapist. And I really wanted to make a joke out of that, but I couldn't think of one. They all had a range of perspectives. Maya, a GP, and I spoke about the multitude of things stopping us from listening from a business standpoint, and the lack of space for empathetic listening in the world of medicine. I then went on to speak about listening to vibrations of energy with the spiritualist. And then, last but not least, was ambiguously my favorite, and it was about silence. And the ability to be comfortable within it. Before I started researching about listening, I'd constantly find myself in my own thought bubble of what I'd say or do when I was meant to be listening to the person. This is common. I think some of you might be thinking about something else right now. I'm not offended. But when we empty our mind something truly magical happens. The person stops talking, and there's this strip of silence. Everything that was said starts to get puzzled together in your head, and then truly absorbed. If we can try and clear our minds and truly listen to people, we can start to develop it as a natural reaction in our day-to-day lives. I had all this information, all this interest, but I was still stuck on what I was doing with my project. Was it just a flow of consciousness with no end? I knew that I wanted to look at listening person to person, rather than to nature or music or vibrations of energy. I carried on meeting with my mentor, Belinda, and researching and finding conversation anywhere I could. We started to develop this idea of holding controversial debates, then having a crash course on listening and seeing what specific things changed. We developed this idea for a while, but it wasn't quite right. We realized we'd bitten off more than we can chew from genuine listening. It was one thing to truly listen to someone that agrees with you, but a whole other ballgame to listen to someone disagreeing with you. And that's when the collective cafe was created. We got 10 adults and 10 teenagers together. We paired them up and let them have a conversation for 10 minutes. After the 10 minutes, I stopped them and gave a crash course on listening skills that I felt helped me develop my listening. Things like letting go of ego and judgment, not thinking of your response whilst the person's still talking, stuff that we all think we can do so amazingly, but when you really concentrate on it, we actually can't. We spoke about judgmental filters, and it made me wonder about today. All the filters you all will all have. I wonder how you're all listening to me. Am I just a floppy fringe, naive 17-year-old boy who doesn't know what he's talking about? Or am I the enlightened savior who will lead our future generations? Yeah, I definitely prefer the second one. But really think about it. Then try and let those filters go. Really try and hear me for my words, not my impeccable image, or my past, or my accomplishments, or my failures. It's hard, isn't it? But Martin Luther King Jr., this is not him, this is just a baby. Martin Luther King Jr. He once said that a baby's first cry is a bid for attention, and sometimes the cry never stops. We are now in the age of communication, and there's so much talking going on. We've created a world where it's easier to talk than to listen. I want to strive for this idea of learning to listen over learning to talk, understanding that taking the time to listen to someone doesn't mean we're agreeing with them. We all have control of our core values and views. Why don't we take all information from all possible sides that we can and then evaluate our standpoint? It's time to change our internal radio from transmitting to receiving. Now, Marcel Sternberger, a photographer, creature of habit. He used to get the 909 Long Island Railroad to Woodside every morning. But on January 10th of 1948, he didn't do it. He decided he was going to visit a sickly friend. So he got on a train that he'd never been on before and quickly found his seat. He found himself sitting next to a man reading a Hungarian newspaper. And being of Hungarian descent himself, he eventually struck up a conversation. He said, "What are you doing in New York?" The man then said, "I'm looking for my wife." Marcel went, "What do you mean you're looking for your wife?" The man went on to tell the story of how during the war he lived in Durban in Hungary. He'd been taken away by the Nazis to Ukraine to bury the German dead. When he eventually escaped to freedom, he returned home, but his wife was gone. One of the neighbors told him that she'd been taken to Auschwitz by the Nazis and therefore would have been killed in the gas ovens. Another said that the Americans had arrived in time to save some of the prisoners and that she may be amongst those that were saved. The stranger said, "By a long shot, I'm hoping she's here." And the more Marcel listened to the story, the more familiar it sounded. He then asked the man what his wife's name was. The man said, "My wife's name is Maria Paskin." Marcel then fumbled around and got out his wallet. He pulled out a dog-eared piece of paper with a phone number on it and the name Maria Paskin. He'd met the woman some weeks ago at a party. He turned to the stranger and said, "What's your name?" The stranger said, "My name is Bella Paskin." Marcel said, "Bella, could you get off at the next stop with me?" As they arrived at the next stop, Marcel went up to the nearest telephone booth, dialed in the number on the dog-eared piece of paper, and let the phone ring. After a few dials, a feeble voice answered. Marcel went on to ask if it was Maria he was speaking to and how they'd met some weeks ago at a party. He then asked, "Maria, can you tell me your husband's name?" Maria said, "My husband's name is Bella Paskin." Marcel said, "Maria, I think you're about to witness one of the greatest miracles you'll ever see." He then called Bella into the booth and asked him to speak to this person on the phone. 10 seconds went by and his expression completely changed. His look was undescribable. He then started to scream as the tears poured down his cheeks. "It's Maria! It's Maria! It's Maria!" Marcel slowly took him away from the booth, called a taxi, and sent him off to the reunion of his dreams. Now, I know this is an extreme example of the power of listening to strangers. A bloody great example, if you ask me. But I think these sparks of interactions happen every day. And although we don't hear about them on the news or read about them online, doesn't make them that less valuable. Think about this. If Marcel had got on that train, seen the Hungarian newspaper, and decided to speak about his life in Hungary, I think some of us probably would have done that. He would have never reunited that couple. The value in speaking to strangers and listening to them is ours for the taking, and it's free. But I want to spread this message that listening isn't just a soundless presence. Really think about that. A soundless presence. I know I was brought up being told that if I sat at a table and was as quiet as I can be while someone was talking, even if it went over my head, I was being a good listener. We need to start to be actively engaged, invested in the conversation, but really listen to every nuance to what is being said. It took me to when I started to write this speech to put my finger on what this was all about, what I really wanted to say. My collective cafe definitely brought me to my conclusion, but I thought about COVID and the stagnation of lockdown. It definitely played a role. But there was a thing that an adult said to me at my collective cafe. He said that you feel love when someone truly listens to you. Sorry. This really stuck with me and was so powerful because over the past year, I've seen the world become so separated, so disconnected. I think now, through love and listening, is our time to unite. And with that, I want to set everyone a challenge. I want you all to leave here today and seek for an interaction that you wouldn't normally interact with, a person you wouldn't normally interact with. Really listen to them. If this seems easy, create as many of these interactions as you can. Everyone we cross in day-to-day life has a story, a piece of information, or an insight that can change the way you see or live your life. Really listen to them. The quiet kid in class, the delivery man, the waiter, the waitress, the distant family member. We're all human. And if we can galvanize each other to listen, we can create these random sparks of unexpected connection and unite as one. Good luck.